So big news out of Saskatchewan in that they announced that they're going to appoint their own chief firearms officer, which is very good news in the fight against the tyrannical gun control that's being implemented by the Trudeau government. I know Alberta has kicked the tires on this kind of idea, but I really, really hope that they go through with it because that would really bother me if they don't. And I really commend Saskatchewan for doing it, and it sounds like they're going to do it for sure, which is a very good sign. So the government of Saskatchewan says it is looking to appoint a chief firearms officer at the provincial level. So again, it doesn't look like it's confirmed, but it is something it looks like they're going to be doing. Usually, the firearms officer is appointed by a federal government. The province said in a news release earlier this year Scott Moe says Saskatchewan would appoint its own CFO. The province says it's working with Ottawa to move away from a federally appointed CFO to a provincially appointed one. We believe a provincially appointed CFO will be well positioned to represent Saskatchewan's position on firearms regulation to the federal government. Corrections and Policing Minister Christine Tell said in a news release, "Our government will always stand beside law-abiding Saskatchewan firearms owners, and we believe a provincially appointed CFO will assist in that advocacy. The CFO administers the Firearms Act in the province, along with supervising licensing, transporting, and carrying firearms. The CFO can also license instructors delivering gun safety courses in Saskatchewan." So, um, that doesn't make it 100% clear just how much power the CFO has, but by the sounds of things, they can change a lot of the laws in that they can say, okay, um, people can they can change the transport laws, which again are already much too strict, especially for restricted firearms, carrying firearms. I think on private property, people should be able to even um, going into town and whatnot. Again, I think people should be able to get concealed carry permits, all that kind of stuff. And this is something that's a very good sign in that if the government's going to be like this, provinces should be able to regulate their own laws when it comes to guns. If Quebec and or Ontario wants to have an outright gun ban, go ahead, but let us have our guns, and you can go ahead continue to have your inner city gun problem. And the one thing that they'll point out for as an argument against that, which doesn't make any sense, and I'll get to that, is oh well, you can't have less gun control in Alberta. People just bring their guns in, they'll get smuggled in, and that argument doesn't make sense because Quebec and Ontario are both closer to the U.S. than they are to Saskatchewan or Alberta, especially Toronto. I mean, there's massive area of Western Ontario that's you need to go past, in plus Manitoba, to get there. So even though you can, what is it, maybe a couple hour drive? I don't even know how far it is, but it's not very far from, uh, you know, uh, New York, wherever the closest border crossing is to um, Toronto and to Montreal or anywhere. So that's the problem too. And the other thing about the anti-gun people is that they're the kind of people that support lax border control. Again, they say, oh well, guns are going to get smuggled in, but yet they turn around and support lax border control because they want immigrants to come in here and vote for them. But again, you can't have it both ways. And even if there is stricter border control, the guns are still going to get in. Now you might cut down on it a little bit, but there's massive areas in like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, where there's massive open fields where people could just walk across and nobody would see them, especially at night. So that's the problem, is that unless you're willing to build a wall and to radically um, increase border security, which I think is not feasible. I think we should definitely crack down, but the amount that you'd have to crack down to see a major impact is more than we could afford. That's the only way that you're going to change this kind of stuff. But getting back to the main point here is that um, good on Saskatchewan for doing this, and I really hope that they do this. I really hope that it works out well, and it shows the rest of Canada that their stupid BS gun gun control that has no basis in fact or reality. It's just strictly political. We know that of all the guns they ban, they kill about one person a year. They're going to spend billions of dollars to implement this gun ban, and yet you're going to save one person a year. It makes no sense whatsoever. Just imagine if you put that money into cancer research or something. You'd save tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. But you're worried about the one person a year that gets killed by these guns. Like come on. There's tens of thousands, probably even maybe even hundreds of thousands of AR-15s in Canada, and yet I've yet to see someone give me an example of someone being shot and killed by someone who legally owned an AR-15. And yet there's hundreds of, probably, I'm just guessing, but there's probably a good 100,000 legally owned AR-15s in Canada. And yet not one example. Now, there may be an example, but I've yet to see one example. And I'm sure if there was, the mainstream media would be reminding us about it constantly. So that's probably all the more evidence you need to know that it's BS. Um, so that's the problem. Like I say, there's probably tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 SKSs in Canada. When has there been I mean, there probably has been, but when has there been an example of someone legally owning that gun killing someone? Like, when has there been an example? I haven't seen one. Now you constantly see that is a popular gun for criminals to own, but they're criminals. They don't legally own the gun in the first place. What difference is one more law going to make? Again, handguns are already heavily, heavily restricted in Canada. Like, you get caught with a handgun that you don't legally own in Canada, even if you legally own a handgun, you get caught with it out in public, that's a mandatory minimum 6 months in jail, I believe. So the idea that more laws is going to make a difference is insane. It's insane. Not to mention too, even if you do own guns legally, you still have to own them for a lawful purpose. So let's just say that you buy your guns illegally and you buy guns legally and you decide you're going to become a drug dealer. You don't own those guns for a lawful purpose. Therefore, if the government catches wind of that, if the RCMP catch wind of that, they will take your guns, because self-defense is not. I mean, owning them to defend your drugs is definitely not a legitimate reason. But in Canada, you need a legitimate reason to own a gun, and I don't agree with that. But there's no such thing as the Second Amendment in Canada, unfortunately. But that's the problem with that, is that the anti-gunners, they're so ignorant when it comes to gun laws. It's not even funny. And again, that's a whole other thing, so don't get me started on that. But um, that is the problem. That there's a lot of stuff that they really don't understand. But like I say, to basically to sum it up, this is a very, very good sign for Canada. I mean, not for Canada, but for Saskatchewan. I really, really hope Alberta does this as well. I hope and pray that they do this, because the more FUs we can give to the Trudeau government, the better at this point. So good on Saskatchewan. I really wish them well with this kind of stuff. Um, and it's going to be good. Now, the other thing being to point out is that the last thing I wanted to point out, and then I'll leave it there. There are several organizations and I believe some individuals that are taking the government to court over this. We have the CCFR, which is the most major one. We have, I believe, a lawyer out of Ontario that's taking them, a prominent lawyer. We have some individuals. We have, I think, Alberta Tactical Rifle Supplies is doing something too. So be sure to support, even if you're in Saskatchewan too, because don't think you're completely off the hook with this. Um, you need to support these organizations. Now, again, if you don't have any money to support them, at the very least, follow them on all the social media platforms, watch their stuff, spread their information, because if you don't got money to spend, that's as good as anything, to spread the information. And another subscriber, another follower, just goes to show that these people are popular. That owning guns in Canada is a popular thing, because that's a popular myth that the anti-gunners, they don't really argue, but they kind of just assume when they're making their arguments, is that gun ownership is this rare thing in Canada. It's not really all that popular, when in reality it is. But we need to have more and more evidence backing that up. So that's what the last thing I wanted to point out is, make sure to support the all the people taking the government to court, especially the lower end ones, because I think the CCFR is well funded for their fight. But check out the other ones. I would say, again, ideally you donate to every one of them. Like rather than giving $100 to one of them, give 20 to 3 or 4 or 5 of them, 25, whatever you want to do. And that way, like I say, the more we can throw at the federal government, the better, because the more stuff that they have to deal with, the harder it's going to be for them. And I guess the last thing I wanted to bring up is something I just thought of. Um, these court proceedings could be precedent setting, which is very, very important for both ways. In that, if the court, if the judge or the courts rule against the CCFR or any of these other people or groups taking the government to court, that gives the government carte blanche, all the power in the world to literally ban all the guns they want through the undemocratic OIC process. And the problem isn't as gun owners and as people who just support general rights and democracy in general, or at the very least the idea of a democracy. Um, we don't want the whole OIC thing to be the end all be all, because they could easily get the support of the Greens and or the NDP to push it through the quote unquote democratic way. So that's not the hill to die on. The hill to die on is it's completely unjustified in that these guns kill an incredibly small amount of people. If you actually cared about saving lives, sorry, you would deal with gang violence, you would deal with the people that have the guns illegally. So that's the last thing to point out, is that the whole OIC thing isn't the hill to die on. The undemocratic thing isn't even the hill to die on. The hill to die on is they're not actually going to be saving any lives when it comes to this kind of stuff. And there's no way that the government, that Bill Blair and Justin Trudeau don't know this kind of stuff. There's no way in the world that they don't know exactly or very close to the amount of people that these guns actually kill. Because let's just say that these guns kill like 10,000 people a year, like an insane amount of people, or 100,000. I would guarantee you that they would be reminding us of the amount of people that these guns are killing and the amount of lives that they would be saving. But the fact that they're not doing that just goes to show that they know that they're not actually going to be saving lives. They want to. The reason why the left wants gun control, and I'm going to put this up in as much of a nutshell as I can, they want to increase the size and power of government. And the only thing standing in the way of a authoritarian government, or a government that's so massive that it can't be scaled back, and so intrusive that it can't be scaled back, is gun ownership. That's the only thing. That's the only thing. Um, so anyway, I'm going to leave the video there. If you liked it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got a link in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already, and check me out on BitChute if you haven't already. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there.